And what advice do you give people who decide, let's say, not to ignore the travel advisories and still go into these areas? Tony?
Well, travel security and safety from our perspective is a bit like the weather reports. You can still go outside, you could be totally unprepared. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we tell you. If you still choose to ignore that, then you're going to get wet potentially. From our perspective is that we do the best we can to give a forecast that will help them determine the course of their day, help them prevent disruptions, and certainly remove or mitigate any potential exposure to life safety or life-threatening examples. So we focus far more on prevention than we do cure, and from our perspective, cure is an evacuation, relocation or a transfer.
In terms of cure, what would you have had to do if, let's say, the situation got worse, let's say, hypothetically anywhere else in the world, and Singaporeans had not heeded advice and still went to a particular place or situation? What then would the ministry have to do to evacuate, let's say, to help Singaporeans in such a situation?
We have various options available to us. One is the issue of evacuation. If you turn the clock back in July 1997, we did mount an evacuation exercise. This was in Cambodia when civil unrest broke out in the country. I think at that point, if I'm not wrong, we airlifted 200 Singaporeans out of the country back to Singapore. The other option available to us is that of assisted departure. Again, wind the clock back to 1998, riots in Jakarta. Over the span of 4 days, we actually assisted 10,000 Singaporeans fly out of Indonesia back to Singapore. The difference between an evacuation and an assisted departure is that an evacuation will predominantly rely on military assets being deployed. Assisted departure would see the use of commercial services. And here we work very closely with the national carriers to mount either scheduled flights, additional flights, or chartered flights to bring Singaporeans back to Singapore. And to us, assisted departure gives us a broader range of options to play around with to get Singaporeans back to Singapore as speedily as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to go for a short break right now. When we come back, we'll talk about the cost of travel disruptions and what consumers should look out for before going on holiday. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talking Point. We're discussing what you should know and do in the event of a travel disruption. Now, Rochelle, let's talk about Singaporeans' expectations. When there is a travel disruption, whether or not it is like the Bangkok situation or something even less, something like the ash cloud of Europe, how do Singaporeans respond and what do they expect you to help them with?
Basically, they always call and ask for refund.
Oops. Besides that,
when they have, they were asked to postpone their trip, cancel their trip, or make other arrangements. Of course, expecting to have the least charges involved.
Do you find that Singaporeans now are more aware and would actually take out insurance before they travel?
Oh, yes, they do. Okay, in actual fact, for us, we always encourage our consumer to purchase a travel insurance. Okay, even upon booking, can be months ahead.
Tony, how about you? I mean, in terms of dealing with different people you have to help evacuate or, you know, through medical service or whatever, what are expectations like today? Are they realistic?
I think they've changed, and certainly touching on earlier, one of the defining moments in the recent sort of history of things was the Cambodia event. And we've seen a number of other issues such as Lebanon and a few other areas where governments have intervened. And I think that's transcended to a lot of consumers and citizens to go, well, whatever happens, the government's going to send a naval ship, an aircraft, soldiers, a whole lot of things, when in reality, that's not what actually takes place. And particularly when you look at the encroachment on sovereign territory, if another country doesn't want you to arrive and remove your citizens, there's a whole lot of problems. Whereas from a commercial perspective, we find ourselves being much more rehearsed and utilised because we don't have uniforms, we don't have those boundaries. In some of these countries, we're in and out every single day. We do an evacuation out of Indonesia almost every single day. But it's not because of terrorism, it's not because of bombings, it's because people need to get from an affected area to a non-affected or just a better standard of care.
Right. How about you, Jai? I mean, what are some of the more unreasonable requests you've had to deal with in consular?
I think the one point that we have to make is that expectations of Singaporeans travelling overseas have increased and increased tremendously. Many of them...
They still expect you to fly them out whenever. send a military escort with it.
I'll come to that later.
Okay.
There should be an understanding that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Singapore government is not and cannot be the solution to all of our nationals' problems overseas. Singaporeans who travel overseas they have to take responsibility and ownership of their travel actions. The ministry will help to assist as much as possible.
Let's talk about the recent European air travel disruption. I'm sure there are many Singaporeans traveling in Europe who were affected. I mean, what sort of requests did you get?
Well, we had various kinds of requests all across Europe, to our embassies in London, Paris, Geneva, even to our headquarters. Some of them were pretty reasonable, basically asked for advice on what they could do to tide themselves over in terms of finances, in terms of medical treatment.
Okay.
What is the closest hotel with reasonable rates that we could encourage them to take up. The other extremes, we also have Singaporeans who are stranded, who have come to us for requests of sending the Singapore Navy down from Singapore to London to pick them back up
Yes.
and then back, and also to fly Charlie 130s to fly them back to Singapore. You know, it's beyond our control. Ash cloud, volcanic ash cloud, the airlines are not operating, airports are closed. Even if we had wanted to do that, there was no way we could have mounted an evacuation flight. And here I would like to actually draw the point of difference between what is an inconvenience and what is a crisis. Volcanic ash is an inconvenience. A crisis would be something where your life is in imminent danger. So there is a stark distinction that we'd have to make between a crisis and an inconvenience.